You are listening to Supplement Source, the official podcast of the Council for Responsible Nutrition. And now, your host, Jeff Ventura.
Hello, and thank you for tuning in to the latest episode of Supplement Source. I'm Jeff Ventura, the VP of Communications at the Council for Responsible Nutrition, and I am joined today, actually in the Supplement Source studio, by none other than Steve Mister, the President and CEO of CRN. Welcome, Steve.
Thanks, Jeff.
I think this is your second time.
Second one in.
All right. Well, we got two.
I must not have screwed up the first one too badly.
We have two in the books now. So we're excited. I'm excited to talk today about the Responsible campaign, the We Are Responsible campaign. It featured pretty heavily at Convergence 24, and there was certainly some buzz around it there where it was premiered. But can we talk a little bit about why the campaign now? Why is it so important?
Well, I love the title of the campaign. Responsible, it's our middle name. I mean, it's one of those things where you see it every day in our logo, and it's easy to overlook it, and you don't think about it. But as I think back on my 20 years here, it has been at the center of everything we have done. That this is an industry that is responsible. At its heart, we are doing the right things for our consumer. And so, given that we have had several recent additions to our voluntary programs, and we still have the supplement AL that's going strong, it just felt like it was a good time to kind of pause and remind the industry that, just like I said, we've been overlooking that word in the middle of our name. It's a good time to remind the industry that we have all these programs that allow us to be an industry that shows just how responsible it is.
You know, it's not just a moment in time. It's not just, an episodic campaign. I mean, this has really been part of CRN's DNA for quite some time.
Oh,
and right
from the very beginning.
Right.
I mean, when you go back to why CRN was formed in 1973, it was because the companies that formed us said there needs to be a responsible center for this industry. An industry that has no guardrails is not going to get very far. Mm-hmm. And so they had the foresight way back then to say there needs to be an association that is pushing a responsible and science-based agenda. And we see that now with what we're doing today. It's still helping to show our critics that the companies are doing the right thing.
Well, and I think one could argue maybe now more than ever, the differentiation is needed. I mean, when you think about going back in time to the 70s, that was pre-internet. I mean, and so you didn't have these online sales. You didn't have the reduced cost of entry into the industry being so low that a lot of different questionable players can kind of infiltrate the market. I mean, you had none of that.
Yeah,
I mean, right?
I think there's a difference. Certainly, there were problems. 30 years ago, 50 years ago, there were rogue players. Mm-hmm. I think that the difference now versus then is, in those days, the companies that were causing problems were doing it out of ignorance. Mm-hmm. They didn't know any better.
Right.
They would have said, we're putting a good product out there for our store or our customer. I think today what you have is some players that are still operating out of ignorance. But I think there is this very small part of the industry, but there is this part of the industry that is there to make a quick buck. Mm-hmm. And because of the fact that there are no barriers to entry, the ease of getting onto a online platform and then just selling for as long as you can, milk it and then get out. I think there is this little element of the industry now that is intentionally ignoring requirements. And so it makes it that much more important for companies who are doing the right thing to stand up and be able to say, here's the ways that we're being responsible, as a contrast to what is going on in the corners of the internet.
Right. And, some of this stuff, I think people would be surprised to find out kind of came natural for a lot of the members anyway. It wasn't like, suddenly there was this, huge imposition where they had to change everything in order to adhere to the guidelines. But then I'm sure there are instances where changes do have to be made, and and that sometimes requires expense or resources, and yet time and again the membership votes these measures in out of.
Well, and I've been here long enough that
yeah.
I've seen a lot of these evolve.
Mm-hmm.
So I know the backstory is how did we come to have a protein guideline? How did we come to have a caffeine guideline?
Yeah, I was going to say.
And they come out of different. Sometimes they come out of a little blip in adverse events, and people say, oh, maybe there's a spike here that we need to get ahead of. Sometimes it comes out of complaints against competitors, and one company will say, why aren't we doing something more here? There's a right way to do this, and then there's another way to do it. Why don't we all embrace the right way to do it and do it collectively? And you've heard me say this before, that I think one of the things that makes voluntary guidelines so valuable is that they shouldn't be things that people can just say, you adopt it and nobody's making any change. You're just sort of validating what you're already doing. They should be a little uncomfortable because what you're doing is you're pulling people maybe out of what their comfort zone is. I would do this on my own versus what I wouldn't do on my own. But if all of my competitors are going to agree to put a certain statement on the label, or all of my competitors are going to agree to measure protein the same way, I'm willing to do it because now there is safety in numbers. And I'm not putting myself at a competitive disadvantage by doing it. And so that's why I love the voluntary programs.
Do you think that when you go out and you're looking at expanding the membership, is the voluntary program a tough sell or a value add for potential new members?
I think it's both.
Yeah.
I think for some companies, they look at it and they say, do I really have to comply with all of these things? And yes, this is a requirement of membership. But for other companies, they look at this and they say, this is a community of people who are actually doing things that go above and beyond the law. This is something I want to be a part of. I want that halo for my company too. Mm-hmm. So, that's why I guess the membership process is kind of self-selective here. But companies that really want to do the right thing, this feels like a safe space to bring these voluntary programs into their company because now they're doing something that's above and beyond.
I know that this is not necessarily a consumer-facing campaign. So how in your mind does a member company take that halo and actually let it be recognized by their customers? Yeah. In other words, is there a piece of this where, hey, listen, you're underneath these guidelines, you're doing the work to make sure that you're complying with these guidelines. Add these different conditions to your brag book. And make sure that in your CSR report or wherever your marketing collateral contains. I mean, is that what they should do?
Well, I think you're answering your question in just the way you're framing it. I mean, all of those are things that companies can and should be doing. Yeah. We even have a member logo program where people can use the CRN member logo that we have everywhere except actually on the bottle or the box itself. We don't let companies use our CRN logo on the product because we don't want to suggest that it's a certification of the product.
Sure.
But yeah, companies can use that, and I think it means something. And certainly when your customer, as we call them, is actually the retailer, when you're sitting there trying to get a new product into the store or get, you have a line extension, you are trying to get it on shelf, to be able to talk about the fact that you're a CRN member and that, CRN does things the right way. We have these voluntary programs. We're talking to retailers all the time too. We know that they know who CRN is, and we know that that means something to them. So hopefully our companies are leveraging these programs and the voluntary things that we do as a way to demonstrate their commitment when they're trying to get a retailer to bring them on board.
What do you hear in terms of the feedback? Well, let's back it up. I think people would be surprised at what a deliberative sort of process it is. Like these guidelines don't just materialize out of thin air. I mean, there is a lot. I mean, I saw this firsthand with the recent melatonin guidelines. I mean, there is a lot of deliberation at the board level about the right way to do.
But it starts so much earlier than that. So when we have one of these, we start with a task group that is around the topic. So, for instance, we had a probiotics task group when we started our probiotics guidelines, and it's the member companies who make products with that ingredient.
Sure.
So we have the people who are most impacted as the starting point. And we get together, we look at the science, we look at what else is out there, what could be done.
And this could go on for a very long period of time.
Sometimes it does. It's
right,
you can get very,
right.
Sometimes it's like, come on, can we speed this up?
Yeah.
Let's get this.
But it's not it's not willy-nilly a matter of a couple of weeks. I mean, sometimes this is a real process.
Oh,
multiple meetings.
At least months.
Yeah.
And then once the task force gets something that it feels comfortable with, then it goes up to our committee structure, and it'll go through either the regulatory affairs committee or scientific committee or whatever is relevant that needs, and sometimes more than one. Mm-hmm. They have to sign off on it too. And then it eventually gets to the board of directors for final approval and adoption by CRN. But that happens really at the end of the process. And then, sometimes that's not just one meeting. We'll have one meeting where we introduce it, people talk about it, and companies say, well, I'm still not real comfortable with it. I want to go back and talk internally and make sure that this is something that we can live with. Mm-hmm. So it may take a couple of meetings. So this can be on average, probably a year process.
Is there a particular measure that when you go to tell somebody about these guidelines, these measures, is there a particular one that you kind of gravitate toward as a case study because you feel it's emblematic of sort of the good work being done? I mean, I know you have mentioned to me, and I've kind of looked back on some of the measures that predate my arrival here. I mean, the caffeine one I thought was particularly interesting.
I looked at different ones for different reasons, and I have pride in them for different reasons. Mm-hmm. The protein one, where we said we're going to use a certain method for calculating protein content that's on the label, and we're not going to allow amino acids that might be contributing nitrogen to the mix to spike the product in such a way that we're overinflating how much is there. And that was something that the companies didn't have to do,
right?
But they were noticing that they had competitors, and they were testing each other's products as they are apt to do. And by doing that, CRN members got ahead of it. They all adopted the program. And a year or so after we adopted it, there was a whole group of class action lawsuits against other companies on that same issue. And our companies were saved from that. So, I look at that one and think, well, that was a case where we really sort of headed off potential problem. I look at the melatonin situation where, we're seeing this spike in adverse events among young kids. Mm-hmm. There's nothing that the industry is doing wrong here. Parents are leaving products out, and kids are getting into it.
Well, and even the adverse events were, we've looked at that, and we don't even necessarily think it was the classic definition of what an adverse event even is.
Right.
It's more like the conflated poison control calls.
Right. The parent scoops the kid up. I guess I say the overabundance of caution.
Yeah.
They rush the kid into the emergency room or call a poison control center just in case.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, I look at that, and I'm really proud of what the companies did there, because they said, you know what, we're going to get ahead of this one, and let's just agree to put everything that is flavored and attractive to kids. We'll put that in a child deterrent package.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the willingness to sort of, and it's an overused word in corporate America, but I mean, proactive. I mean, it is saying, hey, this makes sense. We want to do the right thing by the consumer. Let's all hold hands here and do the right thing.
Yeah, and as I said before, again, it shouldn't always be comfortable. Mm-hmm. By its very nature, it sometimes should be a little uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. Because if it's something that everybody's already doing anyway, well, that's not showing leadership in the industry.
Right, yeah. Well, leadership is always a great note to end on, and we are at our time today. Of course, you're the boss, so if you want to keep talking, we can keep talking as long as you want about guidelines. I certainly am very interested in hearing more. Anything that we're not talking about that you want to mention around this?
Well, so responsible is our middle name, has focused a lot on the voluntary guidelines, but it's not just limited to that. It's some of the other things that we're doing that show responsibility too. And so, I want to mention our supplement AL.
Oh yeah.
I think, we started that like 7 years ago, and it's a requirement of membership. And I have external stakeholders say to me, I go and I use the Supplement Al database. I go look at labels there, and I'm so glad that I have that ability to just go see them all in one place. So
I use it all the time.
Yeah, one of the other reasons we did it, of course, was to sort of beta test this ability of what would a mandatory listing look like. Is this something that industry could comply with without breaking the bank? But in the meantime, it's having a real value of showing that our members are transparent with their customer and that they're willing to put those out there where anybody can see. I think about the work that we've done in advertising, which is, again, not necessarily a voluntary program, but it was a long-term effort. We worked with the National Advertising Division. That was sort of, surprising to people at the time that the industry is actually filing challenges against one another. You're calling out your competitors if they're saying something that's not true or is misleading to the consumer. And we're like, yes, we are.
Yeah, was that so wrong?
That's
right.
Absolutely. So that's really sort of what the spirit of the campaign is about, is that this is an industry that, yes, we are regulated, which I guess is a topic for another podcast. Yeah. But in addition to that, it's an industry that looks beyond what's required by law and says, what should we be doing to deliver safe and effective products to our consumer? And if there's a way that we can collectively push the industry ahead, we're willing to do it.
I think that's a great note to end on. Steve, Mr., thank you so much for shedding some light on this. I know that a lot of people are going to benefit from the information that you've shared today. So thank you for coming on Supplement Source.
Thanks, Jeff.